USS Arizona was a Pennsylvania-class battleship built for and by the United States Navy in the mid-1910s, named in honor of the 48th state's recent admission into the Union. The ship was the second and last of the Pennsylvania class of super-dreadnought battleships. Although commissioned in 1916, the ship remained stateside during World War I. Shortly after the end of the war, Arizona was one of a number of American ships that briefly escorted President Woodrow Wilson to the Paris Peace Conference. The ship was sent to Turkey in 1919 at the beginning of the Greco-Turkish War to represent American interests for several months. Several years later, she was transferred to the Pacific Fleet and remained there for the rest of her career. Aside from a comprehensive modernization in 1929–31, Arizona was regularly used for training exercises between the wars, including the annual fleet problems. When an earthquake struck Long Beach, California in 1933, Arizona's crew provided aid to the survivors. 2 years later, the ship was featured in a Jimmy Cagney film, Here Comes the Navy, about the romantic troubles of a sailor. In April 1940, she and the rest of the Pacific Fleet were transferred from California to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, as a deterrent to Japanese imperialism. During the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on 7 December 1941, Arizona was bombed. She exploded and sank, killing 1,177 officers and crewmen. Unlike many of the other ships sunk or damaged that day, Arizona could not be fully salvaged, though the Navy removed parts of the ship for reuse. The wreck still lies at the bottom of Pearl Harbor, and the USS Arizona Memorial, dedicated on 30 May 1962 to all those who died during the attack, straddles the ship's hull. Description: the Pennsylvania-class ships were significantly larger than the predecessors, the Nevada-class. Arizona had an overall length of 608 feet, a beam of 97 feet, and a draft of 29 feet 3 inches at deep load. This was 25 feet longer than the older ships. She displaced 29,158 long tons at standard and 31,917 long tons at deep load, over 4,000 long tons more than the older ships. The ship had a metacentric height of 7.82 feet at deep load. The ship had 4 direct drive Parsons steam turbine sets, each of which drove a propeller 12 feet 1.5 inches in diameter. They were powered by 12 Babcock and Wilcox water tube boilers. The turbines were designed to produce a total of 34,000 shaft horsepower, but only achieved 33,376 shp during Arizona's sea trials, when she met her design speed of 21 knots. However, she did manage to reach 21.5 knots during a full-power trial in September 1924. She was designed to normally carry 1,548 long tons of fuel oil, but had a maximum capacity of 2,305 long tons. At full capacity, the ship could steam at a speed of 12 knots for an estimated 7,552 nautical miles with a clean bottom. She had 4 300-kilowatt turbo generators. Arizona carried 12 .45 caliber 14-inch guns in triple-gun turrets. The turrets were numbered from I to IV from front to rear. The guns could not elevate independently and were limited to a maximum elevation of +15 degrees, which gave them a maximum range of 21,000 yards. The ship carried 100 shells for each gun. Defense against torpedo boats was provided provided by 22 51 caliber 5-inch guns mounted in individual casemates in the sides of the ship's hull. Positioned as they were, they proved vulnerable to sea spray and could not be worked in heavy seas. At an elevation of 15 degrees, they had a maximum range of 14,050 yards. Each gun was provided with 230 rounds of ammunition. The ship mounted 4 50 caliber 3-inch guns for anti-aircraft defense, although only 2 were fitted when completed. The other pair were added shortly afterward on top of turret 3. Arizona also mounted 2 21-inch torpedo tubes and carried 24 torpedoes for them. The Pennsylvania-class design continued the all-or-nothing principle of armoring only the most important areas of the ship, begun in the Nevada class. The waterline armor belt of Krupp armor measured 13.5 inches thick and only covered the ship's machinery spaces and magazines. It had a total height of 17 feet 6 inches, of which 8 feet 9.75 inches was below the waterline, beginning 2 feet 4 inches below the waterline. The belt tapered to its minimum thickness of 8 inches. The transverse bulkheads at each end of the ship ranged from 13 to 8 inches in thickness. The faces of the gun turrets were 18 inches thick, while the sides were 9 to 10 inches thick, and the turret roofs were protected by 5 inches of armor. The armor of the barbets was 18 to 4.5 inches thick. The conning tower was protected by 16 inches of armor and had a roof 8 inches thick. The main armor deck was 3 plates thick with a total thickness of 3 inches. Over the steering gear, the armor increased to 6.25 inches in 2 plates. Beneath it was the splinter deck that ranged from 1.5 to 2 inches in thickness. The boiler uptakes were protected by a conical mantel that ranged from 9 to 15 inches in thickness. A 3-inch torpedo bulkhead was placed 9 feet 6 inches inboard from the ship's side, and the ship was provided with a complete double bottom. Testing in mid-1914 revealed that this system could withstand 300 pounds of TNT. Construction and trials. The keel of battleship No. 39 was laid on the morning of the 16th of March 1914 with Assistant Secretary of the Navy Franklin Delano Roosevelt in attendance. The builders intended to set a world record 10 months between the ship's keel laying and launch, for what the New York Times declared would be the world's biggest and most powerful, both offensively and defensively, super-dreadnought ever constructed. But the ship was only a little over half complete a year later. She was launched on the 19th of June 1915, making it about 15 months from keel laying to launch. In the meantime, the ship was named after the newest state in the Union by Secretary of the Navy Josephus Daniels. The New York Times estimated that 75,000 people attended the launch, including John Parroy Mitchell, the mayor of New York City, George W. P. Hunt, the governor of Arizona, and many high-ranking military officials. Several warships were also nearby, including many of the new dreadnoughts which had already entered service. Esther Ross, the daughter of an Arizona pioneer family, was given the honors of ship sponsor and christening. To acknowledge a ban on alcohol recently passed by the state legislature, the state's governor decided that 2 bottles would be used, one full of sparkling wine from Ohio, and another filled with water from the Roosevelt Dam. After the launch, Arizona was towed to the Brooklyn Navy Yard for fitting out. Arizona was commissioned into the Navy on the 17th of October 1916, with John D. McDonald as captain. She departed New York on the 10th of November 1916 after the crew had cleaned the ship and the propulsion system had been tested at the dock. After declinating the ship's magnetic compasses, the ship sailed south for her shakedown cruise. Outside Guantanamo Bay, a stripped turbine on the 7th of December forced the Navy to order Arizona back to New York for repairs. Although she was able to enter Chesapeake Bay to test her main and secondary gun batteries on 19-20 December, the turbine could not be repaired inside the ship, so the yard workers had to cut holes in the upper decks to lift the damaged casing out. It was reinstalled after almost 4 months of repairs at the Naval Yard. World War I. Arizona left the yard on the 3rd of April 1917, and 3 days later, the United States declared war on Germany. Assigned to Battleship Division 8 operating out of the York River, Arizona was only employed as a gun retraining ship for the crewmen on armed merchant vessels crossing the Atlantic in convoys. Shortly after the war began, 8 of her 5-inch guns were removed to equip merchant ships. When the ship sailed near the wreck of the old San Marcos, the wreck was sometimes used as a target for the 14-inch guns. Arizona rarely ventured into the ocean for fear of U-boats, and when she did, it was only in the company of other battleships and escort ships. 4 coal-fired American dreadnoughts were eventually sent across the Atlantic in December 1917 as Battleship Division 9, but Arizona was not among them, as it was easier to obtain coal than oil in the United Kingdom. Life for Arizona's crew was not all training, as the race boat team from Arizona was able to win the Battenburn Cup in July 1918 by beating the team from Nevada by 3 lengths over the 3-mile course. The fighting ended on the 11th of November 1918 with an armistice. A week later, the ship left the United States for the United Kingdom, arriving on the 30th of November 1918. After 2 weeks berthed at Portland Harbor, Arizona sailed for France. On the 13th of December 1918, Arizona joined 9 battleships and 28 destroyers escorting President Woodrow Wilson on the ocean liner George Washington into Brest for 1 day on Wilson's journey to the Paris Peace Conference. The 10 battleships departed France the next day, taking less than 2 weeks to cross the Atlantic, and arrived in New York on the 26th of December to parades, celebrations, and a full naval review by Secretary Daniels. Arizona was the first in line and rendered a 19-gun salute to Daniels, along with many of the other members of the recently returned fleet. She was anchored off New York City for the next several weeks and open to the public. 1920s. Arizona sailed from New York for Hampton Roads, where she arrived on the 22nd of January, and she continued south to Guantanamo Bay not long after, arriving on the 8th of February. The time in Caribbean waters was mostly used in training for battles and fleet maneuvering, although it included a Liberty visit to Port of Spain. In April, Arizona's crew won the Battenburn Cup rowing competition for the 2nd straight year before the ship was deployed to France once again to escort President Wilson back to the United States. While the ship was awaiting Wilson's departure, she was redeployed to Smyrna in Turkey in response to tensions between Greece and Italy over the awarding of Smyrna to Greece in the Paris Peace Treaty. The Greek and Italian governments had each deployed a major warship to the area to enforce their interests. Shortly after Arizona arrived, Greek ground forces arrived in transports and were offloaded in the port. The resultant chaos in the city caused many American citizens in the area to seek shelter on board Arizona. When the crisis abated, Arizona was ordered to Constantinople before she sailed for home on the 15th of June. She put into the New York Navy Yard on the 30th of June for an overhaul, where 6 5-inch guns were removed and the fire control system was modernized. Work was completed in January 1920. 1920, and the battleship sailed south to Guantanamo Bay for crew training. During this time, Arizona was fitted with a flying-off platform similar to the one given to Texas in March 1919. In April, Arizona lost the Baton Burn Cup to Nevada, and in June she was present for the Naval Academy's graduation ceremonies. In August she became the flagship of Battleship Division 7, although it was only later in 1920 that the battleship was refitted to be an admiral's flagship. In company with 6 battleships and 18 destroyers, Arizona was sent south again to transit the Panama Canal in January 1921. After meeting up with the Pacific Fleet, Arizona continued on to Peru for a week before the two fleets combined to practice battle maneuvers. After a short return to the Atlantic, which included an overhaul in New York, Arizona returned to Peru in the summer before she began operating from her new home port of San Pedro, California, part of Los Angeles, where she was based until 1940. For the rest of the 1920s, Arizona's service consisted of routine training exercises. Naval historian Paul Stilwell remarked that the Pacific years included a great deal of sameness and repetition, and his chronology of the ship's movements is filled with phrases like torpedo defense practice, battle practice rehearsal, gunnery practice, en route to and anchored at. A recurring theme in these years were the annual fleet problems, which began in 1923 and simulated large fleet actions by having most of the active fleet face off against each other. The first two simulated an attack on the Panama Canal from the west, while in 1925 they attempted to defend the Hawaiian Islands. Other 1920s fleet problems included the Caribbean, near Central America, the West Indies, and Hawaii. On the 27th of July 1923, the ship joined President Warren G. Harding's Naval Review in Seattle. Harding died just 1 week later, and Arizona joined the Pacific Fleet to fire a salute in his honor on the 3rd of August. Modernization. 4 months after fleet problem Mmxx in January 1929, Arizona was modernized at the Norfolk Navy Yard. New tripod masts, surmounted by 3-tiered fire control directors for the main and secondary armament, replaced the old hyperboloid cage masts. The number of 5-inch guns was reduced to 12 and the guns repositioned 1 deck higher, and 8 .25 caliber 5-inch anti-aircraft guns replaced the 3-inch guns with which she had been originally equipped. The ship's main gun turrets were modified to increase the maximum elevation of the guns to 30 degrees. The compressed air catapult on the quarterdeck was replaced by one that used black powder. Her deck armor was increased by the addition of a 1.75-inch thickness of special treatment steel, and the ship was bulged to protect her from torpedoes. An additional bulkhead was added to the sides of the boiler rooms for the same purpose. Arizona's machinery was almost entirely replaced. Her high-pressure turbines were replaced by more powerful geared turbines from the Cancel battleship Washington, and 6 new boilers replaced her originals. Their additional power offset the ship's increased displacement as demonstrated during her sea trials. Arizona made 20.7 knots with 35,081 shp at a displacement of 37,654 long tons. 1930s. On the 19th of March 1931, even before Arizona was put through post-modernization sea trials, she hosted President Herbert Hoover for a brief vacation in the Caribbean. the President visited Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Returning on the 29th of March, Arizona conducted her sea trials at Rockland, Maine, and had another catapult fitted on the top of turret 3, before she was transferred to the West Coast in August with her sister Pennsylvania. In February 1932, the ship participated in Grand Joint Exercise No. 4, in which carrier aircraft successfully attacked Pearl Harbor on Sunday morning, the 7th of February. After returning to the West Coast from Fleet Problem 14 in 1933, the ship was anchored in San Pedro when an earthquake struck nearby Long Beach, California, on the 10th of March. Sailors from the ship joined the relief efforts, providing food, treating the injured and providing security from looters. In early 1934, the ship and her crew were featured in a James Cagney film for Warner Brothers, Here Comes the Navy, which made extensive use of exterior footage as well as on-board location shots. In the early morning of the 26th of July, Arizona collided with a fishing trawler, Umatilla, that was under tow by another trawler off Cape Flattery. 2 men aboard the Umatilla were killed in the collision, and the Navy convened a court of inquiry to investigate the incident. The court recommended that the ship's captain, Captain McGillivray Milne, be court in martial. This took place at Guantanamo Bay Naval Base, Cuba, while the ship was participating in that year's fleet problem off the East Coast. Milne was judged guilty and replaced several months later by Captain George Baum after the ship returned to the West Coast. In the meantime, Rear Admiral Samuel W. Bryant assumed command of Battleship Division 2 on the 4th of September, with Arizona as his flagship. Rear Admiral George Pettengill relieved Bryant on the 4th of March 1935, and the ship participated in Fleet Problem 16 2 months later. Arizona made a port visit to Balboa, Panama, in May 1936 during Fleet Problem 17. On the 8th of June, Captain George A. Alexander relieved Baum as captain, and 15 days later, Rear Admiral Claude C. Block relieved Pettengill. During gunnery practice on the 24th of July, the combustion gases from one gun of turret 2 entered the gun turret, burning 1 crewman. The turret's sprinkling system was turned on to prevent any powder explosion, but the water leaked into the turret's electrical switchboard and started a small fire that was easily put out. Due to the Navy's limited budget, the ship spent most of this period in port as a fuel-saving measure. In fiscal year 1936-37, the ship was anchored for 267 days. The following year it was in port for 255 days. The ship spent the rest of her career based on the West Coast or in Hawaii. On the 2nd of January 1937, Rear Admiral John Greenslead assumed command of Battleship Division 2 from Block and transferred his flag to the battleship Maryland on the 13th of April. Rear Admiral Manly Simons, commander of Battleship Division 1, transferred his flag to Arizona on the 7th of August. He was relieved by Rear Admiral Adolphus Wilson on the 8th of November. Captain Alfred Windsor Brown relieved Baum on the 11th of December. The ship participated in Fleet Problem 19 off Hawaii in April to May 1938. Captain Brown died in his sleep on the 7th of September, and Captain Isaac C. Kidd assumed command of the ship on the 17th of September 1938. The same day, Rear Admiral Chester Nimitz assumed command of Battleship Division 1. Nimitz was relieved on the 27th of May 1939 by Rear Admiral Russell Wilson. Arizona's last fleet problem was off Hawaii in April to May 1940. At its conclusion, the United States Pacific Fleet was retained in Hawaiian waters, based at Pearl Harbor, to deter the Japanese. She was overhauled at the Puget Sound Navy Yard, Bremerton, Washington, from October 1940 to January 1941. During this refit, her anti-aircraft armament was increased to 12 5-inch guns. The foundation for a search radar was added atop her foremast. Her anti-aircraft directors were upgraded and a platform for 4 water-cooled, 50-inch caliber M2 Browning machine guns was installed at the very top of the main mast. Her last flag change of command occurred on the 23rd of January 1941, when Wilson was relieved by Isaac Kidd, by that time a Rear Admiral. Captain Harold C. Train assumed command of the ship on the 3rd of February. Captain Franklin Van Valkenburg relieved Train on the 3rd of February 1941. The battleship's last training exercise was night firing in company with the battleships Nevada and Oklahoma, on the night of the 4th of December. All 3 ships moored at quays along Ford Island on the following day. On the 6th of December, the repair ship Vestal came alongside to assist the ship's crew with minor repairs. Attack on Pearl Harbor. Shortly before 8 o'clock local time on the 7th of December 1941, Japanese aircraft from 6 aircraft carriers struck the Pacific Fleet as it lay in port at Pearl Harbor, and wrought devastation on the warships and the facilities defending Hawaii. On board Arizona, the ship's air raid alarm went off at about 7:55, and the ship went to general quarters soon after. Shortly after 8 o'clock, 10 Nakajima B-5 and Kate torpedo bombers, 5 each from the carriers Kaga and Hiryu, attacked Arizona. All of the aircraft were carrying 410 mm armor-piercing shells modified into 797 kg bombs. Flying at an estimated altitude of 3,000 meters, Kaga's aircraft bombed Arizona from amidships to stern. Soon after, Hiryu's bombers hit the bow area. The aircraft scored 4 hits and 3 near misses on and around Arizona. The near miss off the port bow is believed to have caused observers to believe that the ship had been torpedoed, although no torpedo damage has been found. The sternmost bomb ricocheted off the face of turret IV and penetrated the deck to detonate in the captain's pantry, causing a small fire. The next forwardmost hit was near the port edge of the ship, abreast the main mast, probably detonating in the area of the anti-torpedo bulkhead. The next bomb struck near the port rear 5-inch AA gun magazine explosion. The last bomb hit at 8:06 in the vicinity of turret 2, likely penetrating the armored deck near the ammunition magazines located in the forward section of the ship. While not enough of the ship is intact to judge the exact location, its effects are indisputable. About 7 seconds after the hit, the forward magazines detonated in a cataclysmic explosion, mostly venting through the sides of the ship and destroying much of the interior structure of the forward part of the ship. This caused the forward turrets and conning tower to collapse downward some 25 to 30 feet and the foremast and funnel to collapse forward. The explosion killed 1,177 of the 1,512 crewmen on board at the time, over half of the lives lost during the attack. It touched off fierce fires that burned for 2 days. Debris showered down on Ford Island in the vicinity. The blast from this explosion also put out fires on the repair ship Vestal, which was moored alongside. 2 competing theories have arisen about the cause of the explosion. The first is that the bomb detonated in or near the black powder magazine used for the ship's saluting guns and catapult charges. This would have detonated first and then ignited the smokeless powder magazines, which was used for the ship's main armament. A 1944 Navy Bureau of Ships report suggests that a hatch leading to the black powder magazine was left open, possibly with flammable materials stocked nearby. The Naval History and Heritage Command explained that black powder might have been stockpiled outside the armored magazine. The alternative explanation is that the bomb penetrated the armored decks and detonated directly inside one of the starboard magazines for the main armament, but smokeless powder is relatively difficult to detonate. Thus the 14-inch powder bags required a black powder pad to quickly ignite the powder. The time elapsed from the bomb hit to the magazine explosion was shorter than experience suggested. Burning smokeless powder required to explode. It seems unlikely that a definitive answer to this question will ever be found, as the surviving physical evidence is insufficient to determine the cause of the magazine explosion. Awards and recognition. After the attack, several sailors received medals for their conduct and actions under fire. Lieutenant Commander Samuel G. Fuqua, the ship's damage control officer, earned the Medal of Honor for his cool-headedness while quelling fires and getting survivors off the ship. Posthumous awards of the Medal of Honor also went to Rear Admiral Isaac C. Kidd, the first flag officer killed in the Pacific War, and to Captain Franklin Van Valkenburg, who reached the bridge and was attempting to defend his ship when the bomb that hit the ammunition magazines destroyed her. The ship herself was awarded one battle star for her service in World War II.